Welcome to this session of the School of Communism on the very important subject of how the communists can win the masses. It is very good and very important to have a program and ideas, which we approved unanimously on the first day of this conference. But it is also very important to know, and it's a different matter, how to take this program to the masses. Before I start, a few announcements. This session is also being streamed for dozens, hundreds, perhaps thousands of people who have registered and attending from home, as well as 500 comrades who are present here at the conference. For those who are new to these streams, the reason I'm pausing is because there is translation to the different languages. The session will be organized in the following way. We will have a lead-off for an hour and a half, including translation, and then there will be time for interventions and questions, and then there will be a final sum-up. Without any further ado, I'd like to call on Francesco Merli. Oh, there's one more thing. Francesco Merli, who is a member of the International Secretariat of the organization, and who is also the author of the introduction to this new edition of Left-Wing Communism, which is one of the most important books in which Lenin precisely addresses the question that we're going to discuss in this session. This book is available from the Well-Read Books stall in the main venue, and also online at the Well-Read Books website. Francesco.
Well, good morning to everyone. Can you hear me? Yes. So we are at a turning point in the perspectives for the world revolution. Our international is growing, and the crisis of capitalism is providing enormous opportunities to intervene in the class struggle and build our forces. We are learning how to connect with the most advanced elements and organize them. But we are just at the beginning of this process. The launch of the Revolutionary Communist International is a call to all revolutionary communists in the world to organize around the banner of genuine Bolshevism. However, to prepare ourselves for the tasks that face us, we need to learn the lessons of the past, and we must achieve the deepest understanding of the laws that govern revolutions. The history of the communist movement is full of invaluable lessons. Some of them have been quite harsh lessons, and we would ignore them at our peril. Today, as we are explaining throughout this conference and the School of Communism, more than ever, the political and theoretical education of our forces is of utmost importance. So questions as, what are the laws of revolution? What is, when we talk about strategy, what does that mean? When we talk about tactics, what does that mean? How we work it out? What is the method that allows us to work out our tactics? And what do we mean when we talk about the subjective factor in the revolution? Because the subjective factor, the leadership in revolutions, is not something that is proclaimed and then becomes the leadership. It's something that is formed throughout the revolutionary process in a live interaction with the revolutionary process. So revolutions do happen and will happen even without a subjective fact, even if there is no revolutionary leadership. That's an important question we need to understand. When the masses move in a decisive way and enter the stage of history, that is when a revolution breaks out, it's because of a deep crisis affecting the whole of society, and when the ruling class is incapable of continuing to rule in the usual way. And this allows the masses to enter the scene. We have seen revolutions erupt many times. It is a relatively rare event in the life of people, of course. But from a historical point of view, we have seen quite a few revolutions, even recently. For example, just to name a few of the recent events which we can call revolutions. We had the revolutionary movement in Chile or Lebanon in 2019. The Arab revolutions that swept across the Middle East in 2011. And the second Egyptian revolution in 2013. All these events rocked the stability of states that were apparently solid, rock solid. And of course the list could be a lot longer. I don't have time. And we have analyzed, and we are analyzing these processes as they happen. So we saw in these cases and many more regimes that seem to be unconquerable were broken down into pieces in a matter of days or weeks. Of course, we can have revolutions, but a victorious revolution is a different matter. The key factor without which we cannot have a victorious revolution, a victorious proletarian revolution, is the subjective factor. It's the presence of a revolutionary leadership and the question of the party, of course. If the revolutionary leadership is absent or it's not strong enough, inevitably the energy of the masses dissipates after a period, and the capitalists will eventually reestablish control over the state and society, as we've seen in all these cases, one after another. However, as I said, it is not sufficient to proclaim the revolutionary party in order to have it. And historical experiences teach us that the working class and the revolutionary youth cannot build a revolutionary party once the revolution has erupted in the middle of the convulsions and battles that characterize the revolution. In a way, if you read books like Left-Wing Communism, there is a lot of analogies. There are a lot of analogies that Lenin makes with warfare, between class war and warfare. And in warfare, you don't start building the army in the moment when the war is declared, or you don't go to war without a general staff. Although sometimes when you look at the history of warfare, it would have been better not to have certain general staffs. But the party has the general staff, a good military leadership, must be forged before the revolution breaks out. And from our point of view, a revolutionary party has to embody the experience of the revolutionary movement, and its cadres, its leadership, and the membership have to be thoroughly trained in the understanding of the theoretical foundations of Marxism. This is what we're striving to build today. And we are in the phase of building the embryo of that party. We have to understand that on a world scale. We must build parties with thousands, tens of thousands of cadres if we want to play a role in the upcoming revolutions in one country or another. That is what is required for a revolutionary party to be part of the struggle. The first strategic task for the revolutionary party is to conquer the most advanced elements, what we could call the revolutionary vanguard, and organize the revolutionary vanguard with the party. Now, the concept of revolutionary vanguard as well is not just a label we put on something in a static way. The revolutionary vanguard defines itself in relation to events, and therefore to connect with this layer that is always changing as the situation is changing and organize it, we need to find a way of communicating with them, of providing ideas, of providing a point of reference. The second strategic task for the party is to conquer the support of the masses. And this can only be achieved in the course of the revolution. If we attempt to do that, regardless of the objective conditions, we are bound to fail. And also that can exact a heavy toll on our forces. These two tasks are connected one to another, but cannot be carried out with the same methods. How can we achieve these tasks? So in order to understand that, that's why it's important to study the historical processes of revolutions, where you can see this play out in a live way, in a live struggle. And of course, the main point of reference for everyone who declares himself a communist is the Russian Revolution. And I'm sure there are many comrades who are familiar with the process of the Russian Revolution. But as Lenin explained, a revolution is an act where millions or hundreds of millions of people play an active role. It's a creative act. It's an explosion of energy, of conflict between life forces. It cannot easily be reduced in a scheme. And therefore, when we study revolutions, we really need to get deeper and deeper in the understanding of the processes as they unfolded. That's why it's so important to study in depth these revolutions. And these lessons in relation to the Russian Revolution, the lessons that could be drawn out of the whole experience of between February and October, the history of Bolshevism, and even the first 2 years of Soviet power, which are an invaluable source of understanding from our point of view on the laws of revolution. These lessons are drawn by Lenin in this book that Jordi mentioned, which is the most remarkable contribution to revolutionary strategy and tactics ever written. I'm talking about left-wing communism and infantile disorder. So Lenin carefully crafted this book. I don't think there is a single word in this book that hasn't been thought through. In April 1920, in preparation for the Second Congress of the Communist International. It was translated and distributed to all delegates, together with Trotsky's Terrorism and Communism. But it is, from the point of view of Lenin, this book deals with all the burning questions facing the world revolution. It contains a scientific analysis of all the burning problems of revolutionary strategy and an explanation, the clearest that you can possibly think of, the clearest explanation of the method behind that has guided throughout the history of the Bolshevik Party, that has guided them to navigate a very complex history. So the method how to determine and adopt the best tactical arrangement. And as Lenin said, tactics have to be based on a concrete appraisal of the concrete situation, taking into account all the forces involved. So there is not a recipe of formulas, finished formulas that you can just adopt and repeat, slogans that you can adopt and repeat. And that's what typically we see, in the sectarian approach towards the revolution. It's just sloganeering. But there is something better in this book. There is an explanation of the method. If you want to see it, you can find it. And this method is the distillation of the revolutionary experience. It's everything that can come out from this very rich experience, and an explanation of how you can create the conditions, you can work in order to achieve the strategical aims, which is to forge the unity between the most advanced elements, the vanguard, and the proletarian masses. And beyond that, how to forge the unity in the course of the revolution between the vanguard and the proletarian masses and the larger layer of oppressed people, the semi-proletarian elements and the petty bourgeois masses, and lead the working class to the conquest of power. So my wholehearted advice is, if you haven't read it, you must read it. If you have read it one or several times, read it again, because it's a book that gives you a lot of very concentrated information and theory. And as the situation changes, you find different things. And then discuss it. Discuss it with your comrades and discuss it again. And I think the aim of discussing this book is to draw out and understand, try to work out Lenin's method, try to understand why and how Lenin reaches certain conclusions. So after the Russian October, the spark of the Russian Revolution sets the whole world on fire, well, at least Europe. If we just think about it, after the First World, well, in the middle of the First World War, after years of nightmare that is destroying the lives and livelihood of hundreds of millions of people, you have the news coming in of some unpredictable, surprising, that no one expected. The workers overthrow the Tsar. Just this fact is, sending shockwaves throughout the working class everywhere. And then the Russian Revolution is followed just 1 year later by the German Revolution of November 1918, which overthrows the Kaiser. This extremely strong regime is overthrown, leads to the immediate capitulation of Germany in the war. It's a matter of a week. German imperialism has to capitulate, and that's the end of the First World War. The end is brought about by revolution. In Germany, workers and soldiers set up revolutionary councils with the workers. These councils of workers, soldiers, and sailors, deputies, spread all over the country and the empire. And these were the remarkable element here is that the working class enters revolution and expresses itself building the same organs of power as in the Russian Revolution. It's not that the German workers and soldiers were copying the Russians. Well, clearly they were inspired by them. But it's because this form is consistent with the revolutionary energy of the working class. It's an expression of the mass power of the working class. And then we have the Hungarian Revolution with the establishment of the Soviet Republic. And the revolution spreads throughout Europe. In Italy, we have the 2 Red Years. Even there, it doesn't take the organization of the working class doesn't take the same exact form. But you have the emergence of the factory councils, a powerful movement of factory councils, which pose the question of power within the workplace, but also projecting this power into society. These are embryonic organs of workers' power, and leading to the month-long occupation of the factories in September 1920, which was defeated only because of the treacherous role played by the Socialist Party and trade union leaders. Don't have time to expand, but everywhere there is ferment in the working class, looking for a revolutionary way out. And that's one of the features of revolution is that the masses enter into a frenzy of activity, of creative energy. They transform everything on their way. And of course you have new layers that awake to the political struggle. They don't fully understand the whole experience of the previous period. They haven't lived that. And so we see a widespread phenomenon of explosive growth for all the workers' organizations, regardless of their political history. So the workers were entering whatever they found available, whatever they were seizing the opportunity to get organized. And for example, we see the trade unions grew by tenfold in the space of 1 or 2 years, or even months in some cases. All workers' party experienced a leap, and this influx of hundreds of thousands of radicalized workers push all these parties to the left. However, this was reflected mostly and foremost in the growth of the traditional reformist organizations that had a more structured presence. The Communist International was only founded in 1919. And the reason for the founding of the Communist International was to provide this leadership that wasn't present, a leadership for the world revolution. And the Communist International shapes up and becomes the party of world revolution. We stand on the traditions, on the history, on the decisions, on the debates that have of the first 4 congresses of the Communist International. We defend the revolutionary heritage of the Third International in the period when it was led by Lenin and Trotsky. Of course, it's another discussion, an analysis of how and why the Communist International then degenerated. But the Communist International was set up to provide the leadership to this vanguard. And the vanguard was defined by the attitude towards the proletarian revolution and the attitude towards the Russian Revolution. That was the element that oriented or discriminated, created the difference between the vanguard and the backward element. The support for the first worker state arising from the revolution. And of course, the task at the beginning was that of putting together and assembling and organizing all the layers that were recognizing, that were supporting, that were rallying in support of the Russian Revolution. The impact of the Russian Revolution was such that in a matter of couple of years, communist parties were formed with a large base in many countries. And in most cases, the Communist Party were emerging from a political split between the most advanced elements inside existing mass organizations, which was the social democracy. And there's also a lesson in terms of the development of the real process of revolution. Here we have organizations that were accomplices. The leadership were accomplices in one of the worst betrayal in the history of the workers' movement, siding with their own ruling class. The trade union leaders suspending any hint of class struggle, reaching enforcing a strict agreement of social peace with the capitalists in order to carry out the war. Such a massive betrayal protracted over several years. And still, once the working class begins to move, this movement has an impact on this organization. And of course, the influx of workers, of revolutionary workers, into this organization has an incredible impact on them. So we have a political struggle developing inside this organization, the differentiation, the formation of currents, of left-wing currents. And as the masses were awakening and moving rapidly in a revolutionary direction, they start to clash with existing leadership as well. And so the problem was posed after a period where by organizing the most advanced layer, the Communist Party were formed. They reached a point where you could say that they organized large layers of the vanguard, and Lenin even in Left-Wing Communism explains that, this strategic aim has now been achieved. The process of ideological struggle, the process of political clarification and organizational clarification has been completed in a way. But how then can we, as a revolutionary vanguard, wrestle the influence that the reformist leadership still has over the masses? Because these layers, new layers, are coming into this organization that don't have all the political experience. And so the problem was posed how to conquer the support of these layers that were not prepared to break with these organizations yet. And Lenin explains very, very clearly, you cannot approach this problem just thinking that by means of propaganda, by means of the struggle of ideas, you will win the argument and win the support of this layer and organize, and grow as a revolutionary party. So the task becomes that of accompanying this layer of the masses that is awakening to revolution and find a way to fuse the most advanced elements with the masses. And while the most advanced elements can learn by a combination of propaganda and slogans and agitation, the masses are not learning in this way. They learn, they draw conclusions out of their own experience. So the only way to win over the masses is to guide the action of the Revolutionary Party that has to show in practice the superiority of the methods. But not just that, it has to show in practice, beyond any doubt, the treacherous role of the leadership of the reformist organizations, beyond any doubt, in practice. And that's the only way to win over the masses. It's not because someone decides that the leadership is corrupt and we need to break from it, that will happen on a mass basis. So one of the problems the Communist International had at the beginning was that of keeping out the opportunist elements that were brought into the Communist International by this movement of support for the Russian Revolution. So we have, for example, the affiliation to the Communist International of the entire socialist parties, like the Italian Socialist Party. And for example, in the Italian Socialist Party, you had a revolutionary wing. You had a wing that was moving in the direction of revolution, which was the majority. But also they had the reformists, the through and through class collaborators with the bourgeoisie, and so on for other organizations, of course. So that's why in the Second Congress of the Communist International, which was in the summer of 1920, the Congress approves the 21 conditions of membership. And the aim of the 21 conditions is to separate the international from these opportunistic layers, these opportunistic elements, but to retain the revolutionary workers. So in these 21 conditions, I invite comrades to go and look it up and read them. There are very specific instructions on how to expel the reformists. Even by name, they're named. So there is no wiggle room around it. Not all of them, of course. But of course, there is a different problem that the international is facing. And that is that the formation of these communist parties this tumultuous growth of the International highlights the weakness, the political weakness of the leadership of these parties. The Bolsheviks were a party that was hardened through 2 decades of political struggle, revolutionary struggle, under many different circumstances, and even that party had, faced difficulties and made mistakes in the revolutionary process. They committed all the possible mistakes, and these mistakes were corrected, and there was an education of the cadres in the process, which the newly born communist parties didn't have. They didn't have this whole experience, this whole history. The process of putting together the vanguard and organizing mass revolutionary parties in a number of countries was continuing. So, for example, between November and December 1920, we have 2 major developments. One is that the majority of the German Independent Social Democratic Party, the USPD, which has about 800,000 members at the moment, and the vast majority of the French Socialist Party accept the 21 conditions at their congresses in Halle and Tours, and join the Comintern, and suffer minority splits from the right wing, which is a good development. That's exactly the aim of the 21 conditions, and the result is the formation of mass communist parties in 2 key countries. The Unified Communist Party, because there was already a communist party in Germany, as the result of this, reaches about 500,000 members. Then figures vary depending on the source. Several 100,000. So it is a mass party. However, 2 months later, we have the formation of the Italian Communist Party in January 1921, where this political struggle does not achieve the aim, not fully achieve the aim. So the Livorno split of the Leghorn split, Livorno is close here, not far away, brings about 1/3 of the delegates of the Congress of the Socialist Party to walk out after a sharp internal struggle in the party based on the 21 conditions. And let's remember that the Socialist Party as a whole was already a member of the Communist International. So the communists walk out of the Congress, leaving behind the majority of the delegates who were still supporting the Third International, but were not prepared to break the organization, but expressed a confused but revolutionary position, moving in direction of revolution and communism around the majority faction led by Giacinto Serrati. And this, as previous events, reveal another side of the problem in forging the leadership for the revolution, which is addressed by Lenin in Left-Wing Communism, which the subtitle is An Infantile Disorder. And it expresses what, in Lenin's view, was the problem represented by this trend. It is an infantile disorder. It's something that the party needs to grow out of, to correct. And the whole approach by Lenin is to use these mistakes, use the experience in order to educate the party. Lenin is not afraid of splits, but as overall, the idea is, how are we going to reach a clarification? How are we going to reach what we need? And the left communist trends vary widely in terms of ideas, of tactics, of different adjustments and concessions. But they all represent the same thing, and it's the impatient mood that develops in a layer of the vanguard in the course of the revolutionary process. And if it's not addressed properly by the leadership, the revolutionary leadership, this can lead to very dangerous situations developing. In the case of the Communist Party, of course, the ultimatist and sectarian positions of the leadership of the party and of the opposition inside the Socialist Party in the battle of ideas to conquer the vanguard were clearly the reason for having failed to unify this vanguard. The most insidious weakness of the Italian Communist Party was not in its numbers, but was to be found in its ultra-left policy. And this was clearly reflected in the impact of the Communist Party in the class struggle. Unfortunately, one of the characteristics of that period was also that the class struggle was expressing itself in such a violent way, with violent swings in the situation. and there was not much time, in the hands of the leadership of the Communist International to correct these mistakes. So, for example, we see the impact of these wrong policies, of ultra-left policies, in the case of the Italian Revolution. The Italian Revolution, when the Communist Party is born in January 1921, we already have, the revolution has already passed its peak with the occupation of the factories, which ended up in the possibly biggest trade union victory in the history of the Italian workers' movement, but also the biggest defeat. And in fact, the ruling class, scared of revolution, they understand the danger of revolution. In fact, during the occupation of the factory, we have the liberal bourgeois leaders who are considering to transfer power in the hands of the trade unions as the only way to prevent a revolution. They are very clear about it. There is even a conversation recorded for some reason between one of the main strategists of the capitalist class, the director of Corriere della Sera, and one of the ministers in Rome, where they tell each other, well, Giolitti, the prime minister, was somewhere in the countryside hiding, and they tell to each other, what can we do? This is revolution. And one of the two, now I don't remember which one, comes up with the idea, we need to give power to the CGL. That's the only way to prevent revolution. The other says, no, but this is revolution. And the other says, no, this is the only way to prevent revolution. They understand the role of the reformist leaders, and of course they're prepared to use it. So once this scare is over and the occupation of the factory is finished, you have decisive sectors of the Italian ruling class, the capitalists, that fall down and start actively supporting the fascists. They have no trust whatsoever in the liberal leadership, or in the ability of these historical representatives of the Italian ruling class to continue ruling using the same methods. So they start investing in the counter-revolution. So in the course of 1921, we have the surge of fascist attacks against all workers' organizations. It's like a black tide. Hundreds of workers are killed. And there is a spontaneous reaction against the rise of fascism. Workers spontaneously start organizing militias. These militias become a movement. It's called the Arditi del Popolo, the People's Brave. It's involving workers from all different parties, the Socialist Party, the Communists, anarchists. And these Arditi del Popolo were gaining momentum, becoming stronger. But the movement collapsed after the leadership of the Communist Party decided to withdraw their forces. They even issued an order threatening expulsion of those who were joining these militia. And of course this had a demoralizing effect and prevented the spreading of the movement. They tried to set up a communist militia, but they failed. We can see here a perfect example of the pernicious role played by ultra-leftist mistakes. But we have to understand that this is not, I wouldn't call it, it's a mass phenomenon limited to a section of the mass. Left-wing communism in that particular period was expressing the outrage, the hatred that was had built up over years and years of war towards the reformist leadership. For example, in Germany, the trade union leaders were denouncing workers that were attempting to organize strikes to the authorities. A lot of these workers were then drafted forcefully into the army and were sent to the front or jailed. So, this process built up an enormous hatred for this reformist leader in a layer. So if you look back at the history of the Bolshevik Party, the Bolshevik attitude was very different from this. The tactics of the Bolshevik Party was under Lenin, let's say after the reorientation of the party with the April thesis, was always the method was that of challenging the reformist leaders to separate, to break from the capitalists. These reformist leaders, the Mensheviks, to a certain extent we could place in that category the socialist revolutionaries, part of it. They had the support of the majority of the working class. In the course of the revolution, they were thrown up in the leadership of the Soviets. So if we look back at the demands that the Bolsheviks were putting forward, which are transitional demands, very simple but very effective, addressing the burning questions that the masses were concerned about. Peace, land, so distribution of land, and bread. So very simple demands. And they connected that with another demand, which was, yes, an all power to the Soviets. But the Soviets were the revolutionary organs of the working class in embryonic form. They represented a situation of dual power in the revolution, where you have the bourgeois state and the Soviets, but they were dominated by the reformists, not by the Bolsheviks. And so the tactic of the Bolsheviks was to patiently explain, to carry out a mass agitation around these and other demands, and inviting the leaders of the revolution, although they were not revolutionaries, but they were thrown in that position, to carry out the revolution, to meet the demands that were coming from the mass, take power. And Lenin points out in Left-Wing Communism that the struggle against the Mensheviks that was carried out from the very beginning was approached in a very cautious manner. That's his words. So he says, for example, at the beginning we did not call for the overthrow of the government, but we explained that it was impossible to overthrow it without first changing the composition and the temper of the Soviets. We did not proclaim a boycott for the bourgeois parliament, the Constituent Assembly, but said that a bourgeois republic with a Constituent Assembly would be better than a bourgeois republic without a Constituent Assembly, but that a workers' and peasants' republic, a Soviet republic, would be better than any bourgeois democratic parliamentary republic. So you see how this very cautious approach in explaining in a very clear way the ideas. And then he says, without such thorough, circumspect and long preparations, we could not have achieved victory in October 1917 or have consolidated that victory. And one of the things that that strikes most me, at least when I reread Left-Wing Communism, was how carefully Lenin chooses his words. So the Bolsheviks did not win a majority in the Soviets just by means of pure propaganda. They won the majority in the Soviets because they won the influence in the majority of the working class, and because they succeeded in demonstrating in practice the failure of the bourgeois liberals, first of all, and the reformist leaders, beyond any doubt, showing and exposing their inability to deliver what the masses wanted. So there was no peace, no land, no bread. And then a decisive turning point was of course, the understanding beyond any doubt in the masses that not only the reformists were unable to deliver what the masses wanted, but they also were unable to defend the basic conquest of the revolution, which was the workers' democracy, from the attacks of the reactionary forces. And that is, the defeat of the counter-revolutionary attempt by Kornilov in August 1917. That is the turning point, because the Bolsheviks managed in that situation to show in practice that they are the only force that is capable of resisting and defeat the counter-revolution. But how do they do that? That's important. They apply the same method. They openly challenge the government, the provisional government, and so on, to organize the resistance, or give them arms, give arms to the people. And they organize the resistance of the masses against the coup, drawing behind them every section of the mass, and leaving behind, the provisional government that was floating somewhere. So this is the mass preparation, at least in the cities, for the October Revolution. But of course, they could not launch the insurrection just right then, because they had to prepare the ground for all the rest to join in. So they don't launch an insurrection in September. They wait a little bit. They launch an insurrection around around the process that builds up to the all-Russian Congress of the Soviets. So the question of the insurrection is a separate one. It's a tactical question, but it requires the forging of the whole working class into one revolutionary bloc with the vanguard. The preparation for the insurrection is political. First, of course, there is a military aspect, but it's political first because it's a process of taking advantage of all, drawing all the conclusions, drawing together all the conclusions, forging this alliance, and make the maximum impact in order to foster and create and enlarge the divisions in the opposite. Exploit every single crack in the enemy camp. And in indecision, prevarication. So that's the reason why after Kornilov attempt fails, the process of patiently explaining and carrying out the mass agitation with the aim of transforming the Soviets, of gaining the majority in the Soviets, and continuing this demand, all power to the Soviets. All that was the political preparation for the insurrection, without which, by the way, there would be no revolution. You can gain the majority in the Soviets, even unanimity in the Soviets, but if there is no insurrection, if the bourgeois state is not destroyed, well, then you won't have a revolution, a victorious revolution. And for that, you need a revolutionary party to organize that. So they continued to challenge the reformists and say, take power, deliver peace, distribute the land to the peasants, and provide food and shelter, and take power in your hands, all power to the Soviets. So that was the preparation for the insurrection. By the way, there is a very important observation by Lenin that kind of sounds a little bit like a side note, but it's very important. This emphasis of showing in practice, beyond any doubt, to the masses, over and over again, applies not just to the process that leads to the conquest of power, but applies to the transition, even after there is the conquest of power. And Lenin says it's very important observation, because the more the preparations are, thorough and sound, the easier or the less difficult is then to retain power. And we see this, for example, in relation to a number of events that happen after October. For example, the Constituent Assembly. Now, the Constituent Assembly, the Bolsheviks fought for the demand of the Constituent Assembly. They participated in the elections to a bourgeois parliament. That's what the Constituent Assembly was. They didn't gain the majority in that because, of course, the electoral mechanism of a bourgeois election is penalizing the revolutionary. In fact, the results were based on an electoral register where there was all the candidates of the Socialist Revolutionary Party, for example, were elected as if the party was unified. But in the course of the revolution, the socialist revolutionaries suffered a big split between the left and the right. And the left socialist revolutionaries, in fact, supported the insurrection and entered even the first Soviet government. So the result of these elections were reflecting the situation before, not after the revolution, the October Revolution. So how did they approach the problem posed by a situation of dual power re-emerging on the other side? They resolved it in the same, applying the same method. It was, of course, they participated in the elections. They had a fraction in the Constituent Assembly, which was a Bolshevik fraction, and they intervened. The Constituent Assembly was convened. And the Bolshevik deputies in the Constituent Assembly intervened forcefully, posing all the questions that were behind the support by the masses to the revolution, to the seizure of power. And they even posed the question, does the Constituent Assembly support Soviets? To make it abundantly clear, that the Constituent Assembly was not an organ that could express the will of the masses. So once that was abundantly clear, then they decided, okay, we shut it down. You can go back home. So they proceeded to disband it. Actually, it happened because the guards that were guarding the Constituent Assembly, they were tired. They were tired. So they decided, okay, now the assembly is suspended and was never reopened, and no one really noticed. So, of course, that shows just one example, but we can see this repeated over and over again in the first years of Soviet power. For example, in relation to workers' control, to how to socialize property in a way that it still works. And one step after another, the way the didactic approach taken by the party, by Lenin, by the Bolsheviks, in teaching the working class and helping them to work out the way to run society. Of course, the question of the Constituent Assembly is raised in a completely instrumental way, say, by the bourgeois. It was one of the flags of the counter-revolution in the Civil War. But the vast majority of the workers, well, I say the totality of the workers and soldiers, trusted the power of the Soviets as their own. And that was the decisive factor that determined the attitude towards the dissolution of the Constituent Assembly. In fact, I think it was noticed more in Washington or London than actually how much it was noticed in Russia at the time. I'm running out of time. There are just the last 10 minutes. And there are many other things that I can say about the revolutionary process, for example, in Germany. I think a very careful study of the German Revolution shows enormous, valuable lessons on the other side, in terms of the negative side. The confirmation of the warnings that Lenin attempted, that Lenin gave in left-wing communism, are contained in the experience of the German Revolution. Also in a positive way, in a way. But for example, the founding of the Communist Party was at immediately after the revolution broke out. On 3rd of November 1918, we have the mutiny of the sailors in Kiel, and the attempt to suppress that mutiny triggers the revolution. So we have these councils of soldiers, sailors, workers popping up everywhere and beginning to take power in their own hands. Unfortunately, the most important leaders of what would become the Communist Party were just released by the revolution, so they didn't have much time to work on the education of the cadres of the party and so on. In November, there is like a mass split from the Social Democrats. There's the Independents, the USPD, which happens before. In April 1917, Spartacists were the most consistent revolutionary wing of the movement in Germany. They joined the USPD, and they develop as a faction within the USPD. But then, and the USPD is a mixed bag. Of course, there is even Kautsky there. There is like a left wing which is moving rapidly in a revolutionary direction, and there is a right wing which is reflecting some sort of social democrats with the consciousness crisis, but they are reformists through and through. So the task would be to separate the confused elements from the revolutionary part of the USPD. But in November, as the revolution erupts, the Spartacists walk out of the USP and they move rapidly towards the formation of the Communist Party, which emerges as a relatively weak organization. So the founding Congress of the Communist Party is on 30th of December 1918, so just weeks after the revolution erupts. And there are two main discussions that reveal the political weakness of the party. One, there are divisions on the attitude towards the elections for the Constituent Assembly, which are called by the provisional government. By the way, there is a difference, a more complicated situation to deal with for the communists in Germany, if we can compare this situation, and that is social democracy. Social democracy has thousands of full-time workers. They control the trade unions. They have hundreds of papers and roots within society. To the point, and they also, the bureaucrats have learned the experience of the October. They're not stupid. So they don't commit the mistake of keeping up the Soviets while they have a provisional government. So the councils are kind of reassured, the workers are reassured. Now it's the time for us, for the leaders, take responsibility, and the Soviets are effectively shut down. And then they call for the election of the Constituent Assembly. And so there is, a whole discussion in the Congress, what is the attitude towards this election. And in spite of Rosa Luxemburg and Liebknecht and Paul Levy, the most experienced leaders of the party, defend the position of participation, they're outvoted. 2/3 of the delegates vote against. A left-wing communist, Otto Ruhle, comes out and says in his intervention, "We've had enough of compromises and opportunism," and they win the argument in the Congress. That's what I meant when I said this is the expression of the accumulated resentment, outrage in the vanguard. And then the second question is even more revealing. There is a motion set by some area of the Communist Party where this rule is applied already, that the membership of the Communist Party and of the trade unions is incompatible. Paul Froelich, who wrote a good biography of Rosa Luxemburg afterward, came out in the discussion with the slogan, "Get out of the trade unions." And by the way, this was in the same moment when the trade unions were becoming the point of reference for hundreds of thousands, millions of workers. Trade union membership in Germany grew from 1.5 million in 1918 to 7.3 million by the end of 1919, so in 1 year. The decision on the trade union was kind of parked there and postponed to a future conference. But the majority of the delegates were supporting that position. So that affected the capability of the Communist Party to connect with this layer of radicalized workers. Then after, just a few days after the Congress, you have the Spartacist uprising, so-called, which ended in disaster. Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht were assassinated. The party ended up beheaded of the best leaders. And at the elections on the 19th of January 1919 for the Constituent Assembly, in spite of all these events, the workers go and vote en masse as never happened before. And almost 50% of the votes go towards the Workers' parties. 11.5 million vote for the SPD, 2.3 million for the USPD, the left. And of course, an opportunity for to carry out mass agitation in a moment when the most attention of the working class was clearly, as these figures show, they were paying utmost attention to what was happening. An opportunity for mass agitation for the Communist Party to grow and sink roots in the masses was lost. Just a couple of minutes. And 1 year later, of course, the Communist Party grows in spite of everything, but this political struggle leads to a disastrous split in the party. The left walk out or are expelled, both maybe. And in April 1920, they formed the Communist Workers' Party, which has about 50,000 members. So to give an idea of the size of this. That split happens after the CAP putsch, the formation of the party. That's an attempt by the counter-revolution to restore, to drive back all the conquests of the revolution. And it's interesting what happens there, because the head of the trade unions, who is through and through right-wing social democrat, Karl Liegen, I'm not sure about the pronunciation, Karl Liegen, is that correct? Calls for a general strike. And the general strike is a solid, massive general strike. It's a mass insurrectionary strike. The coup collapses like a house of cards. And the KPD position, initial position in relation to that, was the working class cannot support either side. The position is changed by Paul Levy, who is coming out of jail. But this other example, and there are many others in the history of the German Revolution, shows how political mistakes of this type can prevent to achieve the strategic goals of the revolutionary party. In the case of the German communists, there is no lack of sacrifice, no lack of energy, no lack of revolutionary spirit, but these political mistakes prevent the consolidation of the party as the leadership for the revolution. And of course, the defeat of the German Revolution, because of a combination of the mistakes of the leadership, of the revolutionary leadership, and the betrayal of the reformists, is contributed heavily to the isolation of Soviet Russia and the emergence of Stalinism indirectly because of the isolation of Russia, of the Russian Revolution, and eventually contributed to the rise of Nazism, which led to the Second World War. So of course, I'm not saying that that particular mistake in that moment or another mistake in another moment determined that outcome. There were many opportunities to correct and to carry out the revolution. But of course, these mistakes contributed in disorienting, in demoralizing a layer, in isolating the Soviet Union. So just to wrap up, we need today to base ourselves on the understanding of processes, on understanding of the theory. We are in an unprecedented situation. We've seen, which actually it's probably the most favorable conditions for world revolution that ever existed. The capitalism is a world system, has become a world system. Crisis is reverberating throughout the planet. The working class has never been stronger. The reactionary classes that could provide the social basis for the counter-revolution have never been weaker. And of course, we have the same problems. We're facing the same problems as the revolutions before. That's why the lessons drawn in left-wing communism and drawn by the experience of the Bolshevik Party and the Communist International are so relevant today. But it is an unprecedented, favorable situation for the revolution. So that's why we can say that if we learn the lessons of the revolutionary experiences of the working class, and we do not commit too many mistakes, or at least not the same mistakes, not all of them, then we have the chance to transform the planet, to overthrow capitalism, to build the forces to carry out a world proletarian revolution, a world socialist revolution, and end with the misery and horror without end of the capitalist system once and forever. Thanks.
Thank you, Francesco, for an excellent lead-off. We will now take a 20-minute break until 11:05 local time here in Italy. And anyone who wants to speak in this discussion, come and see me during the break. Thank you. Okay, welcome back to this session on how the communists can win the masses. We're now going to have time for questions and interventions. I'm going to call Serena from the Swiss section for a question first, and that will be followed by Adam from the British Revolutionary Communist Party.
Yes, it's just a really short question of something we are really thinking about a lot in the Swiss section right now. Whereas right now we are not in the position of the Third International or of the communist parties at that time. Like, our task right now is not winning the masses, but winning the revolutionary vanguard. And winning them over and educating them. And in that way, we think about what is the importance of this discussion for our work right now, at this moment.
Thank you. Thank you. Adam Booth from the Revolutionary Communist Party in Britain will be followed by Juanjo from the Revolutionary Communist Organization in Spain.
I think Francesco's talked a lot about ultra-leftism and Lenin's left-wing communism, which, as Francesco said, it was that kind of ultra-leftism, it had a healthy character to it, if you like. It was a rejection of the opportunism of the reformist leaders. But you also find that kind of ultra-leftism that's almost like innate within someone, an unhealthy ultra-leftism that reflects an inability to really connect with ordinary people, to always be kind of too far ahead of the rest of the masses, to not understand how consciousness changes. And this is called sectarianism. And it kind of relates to Serena's question, because obviously we're very used to having to kind of deal with sectarianism in other groups on the left. But I also think as we get larger, as we become a kind of point of reference for the most radical workers and youth, that will attract towards us a layer that really wants to do something, a really active layer, but it'll also be slightly imbued with that sectarianism. So we've really got to learn how to guard against sectarianism also within our own organization. It's important to understand what sectarianism is, but also what it isn't. You know, the word sect isn't simply a derogatory word that we throw around lightly. And it's not simply defined by your tactics either. Sometimes I think there's a misconception that sectarianism means simply someone who isn't inside the mass organization. But that's very superficial. You know, in the years of the Corbyn movement in Britain, all the groups we would describe as sects flooded into the Labour Party. And similarly, there's sometimes people in these sectarian groups who look at us launching a new international, and they say, look, the IMT, or now the RCI, they're admitting that these other groups were right all along, and that really they should have been forming a new mass workers' party. But again, that doesn't define whether you're a sect or not. Sectarianism is, if you like, more of a frame of mind. It's an outlook that arises from a failure to grasp and apply dialectical materialism. In other words, what you see is that strategic and tactical questions and questions of approach, they are ultimately a question of philosophical method. And Trotsky wrote a very good article explaining this, called Sectarianism, Centrism, and the Fourth International. And he says one of the definitions of sectarianism is a failure to take the world as it is, and instead to approach it how you would like it to be. In other words, instead of analyzing phenomenon concretely and dialectically in the many-sidedness, the many-sided nature, the sectarian is always imbued with a sense of formal logic. He says they look for abstract, black and white formulas to guide their actions. In such a world, a view, there are no contradictions, just good or bad, yes or no. He says the sectarian is the direct negation of dialectical materialism, which takes experience as its point of departure and always returns to it. He says a sectarian does not understand the dialectical reaction and action between a finished program and a living, imperfect, unfinished mass struggle. He says that sectarianism is hostile to dialectics. It turns its back upon the actual development of the working class. And the sectarian sees discussion as a goal in itself, who is like a man who satisfies his thirst by drinking salt water. And in the end, this sectarian attitude leads them to replace analysis with intrigue, gossip, and hysteria. Now, after writing this article, Trotsky then faced a sectarian opposition within his own organization, the American Trotskyists of the American SWP. There was a debate over what position the Marxists should take in relation to the Soviet Union during the Second World War. And this sectarian opposition it adopted a liberal position reflecting bourgeois and petty bourgeois pressures in society. Said there was no real difference between the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany. And politically, the conclusion of this was that they didn't need to side with the Soviet Union, defend the Soviet Union. So instead of standing firm against the anti-communist attacks that were taking place at the time, these oppositionists were looking for an easy solution. Trotsky said they were looking for some sort of get-out-of-jail-free card that they could present back to the people around them because they inhabited this petty bourgeois milieu. In other words, Trotsky pointed out that sectarianism led to opportunism. And Trotsky responded in a load of letters that you can read now in the book In Defense of Marxism, where we get our website name from. He tried to draw out the essential features of the debate, which he said was one of method, an inability to apply dialectics, to appreciate the contradictory class character of the Soviet Union as a degenerated workers' state. And comrades, if they've read the What is Marxism intro, they will have read his essay from this collection on the ABC of materialist dialectics. And if you haven't read it, you must read it and study it, reread it, and grasp why Trotsky was writing this to combat against sectarianism. Now, eventually, most of the opposition couldn't be won over. They split away. They became one of the many festering sects that continues to plague the movement today. They have descendants that are still around us, unfortunately. And these descendants have not got any better since. They still have no understanding of dialectics, no understanding of the Marxist method. And it leads them to end up on the wrong side on every single debate, in every single struggle, particularly over the question of like the Ukraine war, for example, recently. So I think, there's a lot of lessons for us today from these battles that Trotsky waged against sectarianism. If we want to connect with the real living struggle today, if we want to connect with the masses and be able to lead these struggles and these movements, if we want to be able to make sense of what is a very uncertain and chaotic world, then we need this firm grip of a philosophical method of dialectical materialism. As we get bigger and turn outwards, we need to double down on theory and cadre education. More than ever, we need the revolutionary ideas and methods of Marxism. Thank you.
Juanjo from the Revolutionary Communist Organization in Spain will be followed by Lucas from the Internationalist Communist Organization in Brazil.
Quiero empezar conectando la charla de hoy con la del lunes sobre cómo construir el partido.
Start my intervention connecting the talk today with the talk from today about the building of the party.
La necesidad de las ideas, de los métodos.
The need for ideas and methods.
Nosotros estamos construyendo los cimientos de la internacional y esta es una fase de vital importancia.
We are building the basis of the international, and this is a phase of vital importance for us.
Lenin dedicó un texto a homenajear a Fedoseyev, el tipo que hizo el trabajo invisible de reclutarle e instruirle en sus primeros años de militancia.
Lenin dedicated a text paying homage to Fedoseyev, a man who did the invisible work of recruiting him and instructing him in his first years of militancy.
Disculpad que ponga una metáfora personal.
Sorry, I'm going to give a personal metaphor here.
Yo vengo de Andalucía, una región rural.
I come from Andalusia, which is a rural region.
Allí todo jornalero sabe que hay que atar bien una carga grande si vas a ir por un camino de baches.
There, all rural workers know that if you have a heavy load in your car, you have to tie it down because there's roads are full of potholes.
Y como dijo Lenin, la revolución no es la avenida Nevsky, una avenida ancha, recta, perfectamente pavimentada.
And as Lenin said, the revolution is not the Nevsky Avenue, a plain, wide avenue that's very easy to go down.
La revolución se parece más a un camino lleno de baches en el que si no atas bien tu carga, todo saltará por los aires.
A revolution is more like a road with lots of potholes, where if you don't tie down well your load, then everything's going to fly out into the air.
Podríamos decir que las ideas y los métodos son esa cuerda que mantiene cohesionado el partido.
We could say that the ideas and methods are these ropes that keep everything in one whole.
Voy a poner el ejemplo de Podemos.
I'm going to give the example of Podemos.
Sus dirigentes hablaban de Ernesto Laclau y los significantes vacíos.
Their leaders spoke of Ernesto Laclau and the empty signifiers.
Es la idea de utilizar palabras sin demasiado significado para las masas, de manera que suenen bien a diferentes ideologías.
It's the idea of using words that don't have too much meaning in them for the masses in a way that they can sound good to people of different ideologies.
Ellos ponían el ejemplo de democracia o libertad.
They give the example of democracy or freedom.
En 2014 fui a la escuela de verano de Podemos.
In 2014, I went to the summer school of Podemos.
No se parecía mucho a esto.
It's not very similar to this summer school.
Literalmente dijeron en aquella escuela que no debíamos definirnos porque eso provocaría divisiones.
They literally said that we shouldn't define ourselves because this could provoke divisions.
Pero fue justamente esa indefinición uno de los principales factores que llevó a todas las divisiones en Podemos.
But it's exactly this lack of definition that was one of the main factors that led to all of the divisions in Podemos.
He perdido la cuenta de las organizaciones que se han dividido de Podemos y lo que es peor, todas ellas han perdido a las masas.
I've lost count of all the different organizations that have split off from Podemos, and what's worse, all of these different organizations have lost touch with the masses.
Conforme se fue haciendo necesaria la posición en uno u otro aspecto,
in the way that it was necessary to position themselves in one or another way on a certain different questions,
se iba revelando a modo de sorpresa la verdadera posición de Podemos, de Pablo Iglesias,
it was sort of revealed in a surprising way the true position of Podemos
que no había sido debatida en sus círculos.
that hadn't been discussed in their discussion groups.
Y esto cabreaba doblemente a la militancia y a las diferentes fracciones.
And that frustrated doubly the membership and also the different fractions within Podemos.
Otro buen ejemplo es el movimiento socialista en el Estado español.
Another good example is the socialist movement in Spain,
Un ejemplo de cómo no llegar a las masas.
an example of how not to reach the masses. A good example of a bad thing to do, basically.
Ellos hablan de elevar el conflicto o incluso de crear el conflicto.
They talk about elevating the conflict or actually creating conflict,
Como si el conflicto no estuviese ya más que creado o elevado.
as if the conflict was not already present and elevated.
Por ejemplo, en las acampadas, cuando no sabían cómo expandir el movimiento, propusieron acciones ultraizquierdistas para elevar el conflicto.
For example, in the student encampments, they didn't know how to expand this movement, so they proposed ultra-leftist actions in order to elevate the intensity of the conflict.
Supuestamente las consecuencias de esto serían que la burocracia universitaria se asustaría y cedería.
Supposedly, the consequences of these actions would be that the university administration would get scared and would concede.
Y al mismo tiempo llamaríamos la atención de más gente.
And at the same time, we'd attract the attention of more people.
Pero esto es totalmente idealista.
But this is completely idealist.
Ocurrió lo contrario, la burocracia cerró toda posibilidad de acuerdo y la gente se empezó a ir de la acampada.
The opposite happened. The university administration shut off all possibility of coming to an agreement, and the people started to leave the encampments.
Tengo poco tiempo, así que debo saltarme cosas.
Ah.
Quiero hablar de la propaganda y la agitación.
I don't have that much time, so I'm going to skip over a few things. I want to talk about propaganda and agitation.
Plejánov dio la explicación clásica del marxismo sobre la propaganda y la agitación.
Plekhanov gave the key classical explanation of Marxism about propaganda and agitation.
Decía, una secta puede estar satisfecha con propaganda en el sentido estrecho de la palabra.
A sect can be satisfied with propaganda in the narrow sense of the word.
Un partido político nunca.
A political party, never.
Un propagandista da muchas ideas a una o a unas pocas personas.
A propagandist gives lots of ideas or one idea to a few people.
No obstante, la historia la hacen las masas.
But that's being said, the history is made by the masses.
El vínculo necesario entre héroes y multitud, entre las masas y sus líderes,
The necessary link between heroes and the multitude, between the masses and its leaders,
se forja y templa gracias a la agitación.
is formed and tempered thanks to agitation.
Pero la agitación es un arte que se desarrolla con la práctica.
But agitation is an art that's developed with practice.
No es solo gritar fuerte, la forma importa, pero más aún importa el fondo.
It's not just about shouting loudly. The way that you shout is important, but not just the way, but the content that you have inside.
Y es ahí cuando más entra en acción la importancia de las consignas de transición de las que ha hablado Francesco.
And that's when it's really important to talk about the transitional demands that Francesco mentioned.
Esta idea de las consignas de transición no es solo algo que podemos aplicar a nivel programático.
This idea of transitional demands is not just something that we can apply at the programmatic level.
Por ejemplo, es una idea útil en una asamblea con trabajadores o estudiantes.
For example, it's a useful idea in assemblies with workers or students.
A veces en una asamblea está muy arraigada una mala idea o una mala propuesta.
Sometimes in assembly, a bad idea or a bad proposal is very deeply embedded.
Y nuestra idea final no conecta con el ambiente.
And our final idea doesn't connect with the mood.
Entonces tenemos que ser suaves en las formas, audaces en el fondo y proponer una idea transitoria.
So we have to be mild in manner, bold in content, in order to get our idea across.
Que construya un puente desde el agujero de la asamblea hasta las conclusiones correctas.
Which builds a bridge over this gap and allows them to reach the necessary conclusions.
Porque realmente las masas son sabias y saben lo que necesitan.
Because in truth, the masses are intelligent and they know what they need.
Nosotros simplemente ponemos el canal para que esa intuición orgánica se exprese.
We simply create this channel so that this organic intuition can be expressed.
Todo el poder para los soviets que vendrán.
All power to the Soviets that are on their way.
Lucas from the Brazilian section will be followed by Jack from the British Revolutionary Communist Party.
Olá, camaradas. Teste. Ok.
I speak to the... Eu falo a micrófono, você fala para você.
Certo.
Pero él va a hablar en portugués.
Portunhol.
En portuñol. Bien. Ok. We'll get there. Avante.
E aí, camaradas, meu nome é Lucas, eu sou um maquinista do Brasil, né, sou condutor de trem e atuo numa célula de trabalhadores do transporte público em São Paulo.
Hi, comrades. My name is Lucas. I'm a train driver, and we have a branch which is made up of railway workers in Sao Paulo.
Como Lenin explica no livro Esquerdismo,
As Lenin explained in his book on left-wing communism,
no combate para conquistar a influência sobre as massas, é importante que nós entendamos que nossa experiência, o que nós vivemos, não é a mesma vivida pelas massas. Não devemos transpor uma em cima da outra.
in our struggle to win over the masses, we must understand that our understanding is not the same as that of the masses.
Eles não tiveram a mesma experiência que a gente. Como os camaradas disseram anteriormente, é necessário que eles comprovem isso na prática.
The masses have not gone through the same experience and conclusions that we have, and it is important that they draw conclusions from their own experience.
Eles precisam não apenas ver que os líderes reformistas não podem levar a lugar nenhum,
They need to see not only that the reformist leaders cannot lead anywhere,
mas que os comunistas presentes aqui hoje, que fundaram a Internacional Comunista Revolucionária, sim, podem abrir um caminho para um novo mundo.
but also that the communists who are present today here, who have founded the Revolutionary Communist International, are able to open the way for a new world.
E qual é a melhor maneira de que as massas realizem essa experiência, camaradas.
And the best way for the masses to understand this is through experience. No?
Nono, qual é a melhor maneira que as massas podem ter essa experiência? Qual é o melhor método?
And what is the best method through which the masses can gain this practical experience?
É a política de frente única, camaradas.
Is the policy of the United Front.
Nos artigos destinados à Alemanha,
In his writings on Germany,
Trotsky já explicava o que era a frente única.
Trotsky explained what was the United Front.
A frente única não é um truque esperto utilizado pelos comunistas.
The United Front is not a trick, cunning trick that the communists use,
Ela nasce de uma necessidade sentida pelas massas trabalhadoras e da juventude,
but it is born out of a need felt by the masses of the youth and the working class,
de unidade para enfrentar os ataques da classe capitalista.
a need for unity to face off the attacks of the ruling class.
Camaradas, nós comunistas
Comrades, we as communists
não temos o menor medo de propor ações de massa junto com outras organizações da classe trabalhadora.
no tenemos.
Não teremos medo de propor.
No, we do not have the means to propose.
Não é medo. Não temos medo.
We do not fear proposing joint actions to the mass organizations.
Nós mostramos na prática que somos aqueles que defendem e constroem essa unidade.
We demonstrate in practice that we are those who propose and build that kind of unity.
E nesse combate, nós somos os únicos capazes de levar as coisas às suas últimas consequências.
In these struggles, we are the only ones who are able to take things to their final conclusion.
E uma consequência prática desse desenvolvimento
And a practical consequence of these developments
é o aumento da nossa influência sobre as massas que sentem essa necessidade de unidade.
is our increased influence on the masses who feel the need for such unity.
Agora, a gente precisa entender também o que não é frente única.
But also we need to understand what the United Front is not.
Não é você reunir dirigentes de diferentes organizações dentro de uma mesma sala.
It is not to gather the leaders of different organizations in the same room.
No Brasil, a gente tem esse tipo de experiência o tempo todo. No Brasil, a gente tem esse tipo de experiência.
In Brazil, we've had a lot of experience of this kind,
E nunca vai a lugar nenhum.
and it never leads anywhere.
Porque a frente única não se constrói em um acordo de cúpula,
Because the United Front cannot be built through agreements at the top,
mas assim a partir da base.
but rather from below.
Foi com a tática de frente única
It was with the tactics of the United Front
que os bolcheviques saltaram de uma posição minoritária
that the Bolsheviks went from being a small minority
em apenas 8 meses para dirigir o processo de tomada do poder.
in about 8 months to lead the taking of power.
O método que o camarada descreveu em seu informe,
The method that the comrade explained in his lead-off,
que os bolcheviques utilizaram,
That the
tem
bo-
um nome,
that
é a
the-
frente única.
that the Bolsheviks used, has a name, is the tactics of the United Front.
No Brasil, nos últimos 5 anos, a gente tem tido uma ótima experiência na aplicação dessa tática.
In Brazil, in the last few years, we've had many experiences in the last 5 years, we've had many experiences of the implementation of this tactic.
Partindo de uma célula muito pequena, de apenas 2 camaradas na Ferrocarriles, na ferrovia, e um camarada de fora,
Starting from a very small cell of 2 comrades who were railway workers and another comrade who was helping from outside,
nós pensamos o como podemos fazer para intervir na nossa luta contra o governador
we started to think, how can we intervene in the struggle against the regional governor
que queria privatizar a empresa na qual trabalho, a ferrovia.
who was in favor of the privatization of the railways where I work.
Nós decidimos criar um comitê de luta contra a privatização.
And so we decided to create a committee of struggle against privatization.
E a proposta era bem clara.
And the proposal was very clear.
Se você, ferroviário, é contra a privatização, você deve se juntar ao nosso comitê.
If you, as a railway worker, are against privatization, join our committee.
E nesse processo, ao longo dos anos, não tenho tempo para relatar aqui as etapas,
In this process, which went on for a few years, and I don't have time to go into all the different phases,
organizando os trabalhadores e levando eles para que participassem das assembleias dos sindicatos reformistas,
we organized the workers and we took them into the general assemblies of the unions led by the reformists,
onde, assim como os bolcheviques,
in the same way as the Bolsheviks did.
A gente fazia propostas nessas assembleias do que nós entendemos que deveria ser feito para impedir a privatização.
And in these assemblies, we proposed what we thought was the necessary tactics in order to fight privatization.
Não buscando convencer os diretores do sindicato reformista. Sabemos que isso é impossível.
Our aim was not to try to convince the leaders of the reformist unions, which we think is impossible,
Mas sim os trabalhadores presentes de que as nossas ideias eram as melhores e as únicas que podem levar ao caminho da vitória.
but rather to try to convince the workers present at these mass meetings that our ideas were correct and the only ones able to lead to victory.
5 anos e 2 demissões depois,
5 years and 2 sackings later,
ano passado a gente conseguiu construir na cidade de São Paulo, a maior cidade da América do Sul,
last year, we were able to build in Sao Paulo, the largest city in South America,
2 greves onde as direções foram arrastadas contra sua vontade.
2 strikes to which the leaders were carried to against their will.
Veja, camaradas, não é exagero nenhum dizer
Comrades, I'm not exaggerating when I say
que sem a intervenção da nossa pequena célula, que agora conta com 10 pessoas,
that without the intervention of our small cell, which now has 10 members,
essa greve não teria acontecido.
that strike would have never taken place.
Isso mostra o poder da tática de frente única.
And that shows the power of the tactics of the United Front.
É uma alavanca que nos permite movimentar uma massa muito maior do que nós mesmos.
It is a lever which allows us to move forces which are much greater than ours.
E como resultado das greves do ano passado,
As a result of these strikes last year,
nós vimos um apoio gigantesco por parte da população, trabalhadores e jovens que usam transporte público.
we gained massive support from the population at large, workers and youth who use public transport.
Então, naturalmente, nós comunistas agora queremos expandir essa luta em frente única por uma luta geral pelo Fora Tarcísio.
And as a result, we as communists are proposing that this United Front struggle should now be expanded into a general struggle to kick out Tarcísio, who's the regional governor.
Yes. Afinal de contas, além de nós ferroviários, o Tarcísio está ameaçando os trabalhadores de outras empresas públicas,
Because as well as threatening the position of railway workers, Tarcísio is also threatening other state sector employees,
mas também a juventude estudantil, com as parcerias público-privadas das escolas.
but also the student youth with private-public partnership in the schools.
A base para a unidade e para a luta em frente única está aí, camaradas.
And the basis for the struggle on the grounds of United Front is there.
Nesse exato momento que eu estou falando aqui com vocês,
At the same time that I am addressing this meeting here,
do outro lado do mundo, lá no Brasil,
on the other side of the world in Brazil,
nós temos camaradas carregando cada um 10 mil panfletos
the comrades are carrying each 10,000 leaflets
para ir nas estações de grande porte, chamando a população para esse ato Fora Tarcísio no dia 20 de junho.
to give them out outside the main metro stations in Sao Paulo, calling for a big mass meeting under the slogan of Fora Tarcísio on the 22nd of June.
Nós tomamos essa iniciativa a partir de uma reunião pública organizada pelo comitê,
We took that initiative at a public meeting organized by the Committee Against Privatization,
onde nós chamamos todo mundo.
where this was an open meeting with an open call to everyone to participate,
Tanto para a base quanto para as direções das organizações.
both the rank and file, but also the leaders of the organizations.
E agora nós estamos caminhando e construindo esse ato.
We are now building towards that rally,
E não temos a menor dúvida
and we have no doubt
que se o ato for bem sucedido,
that if this rally is a success,
todas as outras organizações de esquerda que não participaram da reunião
all the other left organizations who didn't participate in the original meeting
vão vir correndo para participar dos
will
próximos
come
atos.
running after us to participate.
É assim que se constrói a frente única, impondo a partir da base.
And this is how we build a united front from the rank and file.
Então, todos nós aqui da Internacional
All of us here in the International,
temos que pensar em nossas frentes de intervenção,
we need to think about our fronts of in our fields of intervention.
qual que é a situação concreta, qual é a consígnia que nos permita unificar o conjunto dos trabalhadores e jovens, combate concreto.
What is the concrete demand that will allow us to unify the workers and youth in struggle,
Combater sem medo nenhum, camarada.
and to struggle without fear?
Porque se é muito importante ter as ideias políticas corretas,
Because it is very important to have correct political ideas,
também é importante ânimo e disposição na sem isso não se constrói.
but it is also important to have disposition and willingness to build the organization, without which you will not build anything.
Nas palavras de Danton,
In the words of Danton,
o momento é de audácia, audácia e ainda mais audácia.
it is the time for what was it? Audacity, and even more audacity.
É assim que nós vamos conquistar as massas.
And this is how we will conquer the masses.
Thank you.
Jack from the British section will be followed by Frederick.
Hello, comrades. Hopefully nothing goes wrong with the live stream while I'm here. Maybe Nicholas can step in to assist. So it's easy for us to think that ultra-leftism is something exclusive to small petty bourgeois sects. But the period of 1917 to 1923 shows that ultra-leftism can become an organic tendency within the workers' movement. In a period of revolutionary struggle, tens of thousands of the most advanced workers can be thrown sharply to the left. And without a Bolshevik organization ready to catch them, they will join whatever is available, or even create new organizations from scratch. For example, in Britain, a small sect called the British Socialist Party, which was founded in 1911, it grew by thousands in the late 1910s, and it held mass meetings of workers in working class districts in places like Glasgow and elsewhere. And the KAPD, which split off from the KPD, had tens of thousands of members as well. In fact, even after the seizure of power, ultra-leftism can still flourish. In 1918, Bukharin's ultra-left group had the majority support in both Moscow and Petrograd communist parties. It published a paper called The Communist, which is a great name. Not a very good paper, I assume, which had a circulation of thousands. They called for launching a revolutionary war across Europe at a time when the old Russian army was collapsing and the Red Army barely existed yet. The euphoria of the workers, who had made huge achievements in the revolution, meant that they neglected an objective view of perspectives, strategy, and tactics. In 1918 to 1923, workers across Europe had experienced big, earth-shattering events. War, mass strikes, the betrayal of the Second International, workers' councils, workers' militias, mutinies. The advanced layers drew lessons very quickly, but the backwards layers that were newly awakened to political life took the path of least resistance. And this is a tendency, I would say, of all revolutions, in fact. Even while taking part in revolutionary struggle, the more backwards layers joined groups like the Labour Party or the SPD in Germany. And the inexperienced forces of communism lacked a scientific understanding of consciousness. They felt impatient and even disgusted at the backwardness of their own class. And in periods of ferment like this, accidental petty bourgeois figures can articulate this mood of impatience and disdain. One example of this is Sylvia Pankhurst, who dismissed the entire membership of the Labour Party as chauvinist at a time when the rank and file were pushing for a thing called Clause 4, which was in favour of a planned economy, inspired by the Russian Revolution, of course. So we can see that the genuine, healthy attitude of the advanced workers can be channeled and distorted into petty bourgeois revolutionism, essentially. And this ultra-left impatience can go one of two ways, I would say. And both are expressions of the same thing. So one, we have a fixation on propagandistic work as the sole method of building the party. The road of gradual idealistic enlightenment, of cleansing the working class of its backwardness one by one. And this causes groups to lead a sterile, isolated existence on the sidelines of the real class struggle. And this is actually what happened with the early Communist Party in Great Britain. But thankfully, it was fairly easily corrected by the Communist International through education, reorganization, and applying the policy of the United Front. But the second road, I would say, is a lot more dangerous. The road of premature action, of trying to conquer political power before conquering the masses. After 1918, the left-wing KPD leadership in Germany adopted the theory of the offensive. And this was encouraged by figures within the Communist International like Zinoviev, Bukharin, Bela Kun. And this theory said that communists can spark the masses into action. So they tried to organize an armed insurrection in March 1921, hoping that everyone else would join. And of course, it failed miserably. It was heavily repressed, it strengthened the counter-revolution, and it isolated the KPD from the masses. In fact, half of its membership, 200,000 people, either dropped out or resigned as a consequence of this. And this is an example of what we would call voluntarism or revolutionary subjectivism, of failing to take into account the real balance of class forces and the stage through which consciousness is passing. And if this was not sharply corrected at the Third Congress of the Communist International, it would have led to the shipwreck of the KPD and any hope of a successful German revolution. But ultraleftism, like we saw in this period, is not inevitable. Its extent is determined by the size, political level, and strength of the genuine Bolshevik tendency. And it's therefore no coincidence that ultraleftism found very little expression in 1917 in Russia, and before that as well. Because the Bolsheviks were able to absorb these layers and prevent them from running too far ahead of their class. A good example of this is the events of the June days, which I haven't got time to go into. So a period like 1917 to 1923 lies ahead of us. And our primary task now is to do exactly what the Bolsheviks did, to prepare a genuine Marxist leadership in time for when the most advanced sections of our class begin to move in their thousands. That is the only road to conquering the masses.
Frederick from the Swedish Revolutionary Communist Party will be followed by Martin from the Swiss Revolutionary Communist Party.
How much time do I have? In this period that we're entering into, many people who would maybe not be very enthusiastic about fighting for small change, they will be very enthusiastic about fighting for fundamental change. Because it's obviously what is needed. And in the same vein, many people who won't come to a bleak union demonstration, they will block the roads, fight the police, try to topple the government like the Yellow Vests. And I think when we try to reach wider layers, of course, we have to explain things in a language that people understand. At the demonstration or at the workplace, in industrial struggle, when you lead it, when you make a speech, when you talk to workers, usually you would focus on a few central points. But the question always arises, how do we actually achieve that? And I think it can be a temptation in the search to connect to people that we adapt slightly to one prejudice or another. That we start saying, like, if we're only enough people at this encampment, or if only we go on strike, or if only we form a union branch, then we will win. But, of course, in themselves, none of these things are sufficient, especially in a period of capitalist crisis. And that's where other parts of the program has to come in. Have to connect a particular struggle with the needs of the working class in general. We have to connect the basic needs with the need for the working class to assume power. We need to tell the truth and acknowledge all the challenges, all the problems that the workers will face in the course of their struggle. And we have to say what is needed. Because if we don't, then the best workers and youth will conclude that these people don't understand the gravity of the situation. They are not serious. They are just like the others. And to win the masses, Lenin first won the fight within the vanguard. He did this by boldly stating the truth. You find this in What Is to Be Done. Lenin said, we need a party of professional revolutionaries that dedicate their life to this cause. They have to abide by the strictest discipline. They have to systematically and in every way develop themselves and the party. You can imagine that in Tsarist Russia, this was not a small demand to make of people. As a revolutionary youth in Russia 1901, it would have been much easier to go with one of the other factions, where you can sort of locally, you do whatever you like. You only tell the workers what they already understand. You don't need to conduct any revolutionary struggle against Tsarism. That's a much easier life. But the revolutionary youth went with Lenin. It was Lenin who conquered the vanguard, because he spoke the truth. And when equipped with these ideas, revolutionary youth all over Russia rose to the challenge. You find the spirit in one of these revolutionaries, Elena Stasova, who wrote from prison. She wrote, "My life in this, and only in this. This is the flesh of my flesh." And I think this goes for us today as well. If you are a revolutionary youth, you see no future under capitalism. What could be more inspiring than an entire party dedicated to give their life to the struggle? Would not that be what you consciously or unconsciously was looking for? But I think this goes for much wider layers, actually. But because this feeling that there is no future, it's extremely widespread. Actually, you find it among both workers who consider themselves left-wing and workers who consider themselves right-wing. And if they see somebody who is willing to dedicate their life to give us a future, I think you can find many anecdotes and many examples of that they will respect that. Many will be enthusiastic, many will want to support it, even if they're not really sure about these ideas about communism yet. So I really think we should wear the sacrifices that we make as a badge of pride. We should shout them from the rooftops. And we have to demand them of others too. Because it is what is needed. To win the masses, we need, above all, of course, to win their trust. We need to speak the truth when nobody else does. We need to fight for the workers like no one else does. We need to fight for a program based on the actual needs of humankind. And this is a program for the liberation of humankind. Thanks.
Thank you. Martin from Switzerland will be followed by Claudio from the soon-to-be Partito Comunista Rivoluzionario.
Okay. If our question here is how communists can win the masses, then surely we have to learn from the Bolshevik experience in 1917. Because the Bolsheviks actually did it. They went from 8,000 in February to winning the support of millions during less than 1 year. And the precondition for that was years of patient cadre building. But then the condition for it was, during 1917, correct understanding of the objective process of the revolution unfolding, but also following from that correct tactics and correct slogans at each stage of the revolution. And one example for that is the slogans of the Bolsheviks in the period after April. In February, the masses of the working class had overthrown the Tsar, and the ruling class had effectively lost power to the Soviets of the working class. But these Soviets were dominated at this point by the reformists, the Mensheviks and the social revolutionaries. And they handed the power back to the bourgeoisie in the form of the provisional government, which was a bourgeois government. And the result was a very peculiar situation, which we call double power, where we had two competing forms of state power at the same time. The Soviets of the working class organized, and on the other hand, the provisional government of the bourgeoisie. So two competing forms of state power based on different opposed classes. And Lenin explained that this situation could not be maintained in the long run. It was either the counter-revolution, the old machine of the Tsarist state power would smash the Soviets of the workers, or the working class takes power through the Soviets and smashes the old state machine. And Lenin drew all the necessary conclusions from that position, that the working class had to break with the bourgeoisie, with the provisional government, to take power and create a new worker state based on their Soviets, on their own form of power. But to have a correct revolutionary program is only one thing. The real art is to know how to win the masses to that program. And in April, the masses in St. Petersburg, they were really fed up with the situation with the provisional government. They were the first layer starting to lose patience with the provisional government because they did not deliver on the promises of the revolution. That is, to stop the war, to give land to the peasants, and to stop hunger. So they were really angry, and there were big demonstrations in April. and they started to shout, or a layer of them started to shout down with the provisional government. And this also affected a layer inside the Bolshevik party who was in favor of this slogan. And I would say it seems to be the logical slogan following from Lenin's position when you say that the situation of double power has to be resolved, that the workers have to take power. But Lenin himself, he was opposed to this slogan because in fact it was a call for insurrection at that point. And if you call to overthrow the government, you have to be able to replace it with something and to hold power. But at this time, at this point, the Bolsheviks were only a minority in the Soviets. That means that the masses still had illusions in the reformists. And these reformists, in their turn, they had illusions in the bourgeoisie. So instead of the slogan, down with the government, Lenin proposed a famous slogan, all power to the Soviet. And we have to understand this was not at all a call for insurrection. As I said, the Soviets were dominated by the reformists. In other words, Lenin told the reformist leaders that you have to take power because you are in a position to do so. If you take power now, a non-violent revolution is possible. All you have to do is to cut off your links of support of the provisional government of the bourgeoisie and declare that the Soviet EC is the only government in the country. And this really shows Lenin's approach of how to win the masses, because he knew very well that these reformists, they were spineless cowards. He was not just shouting, you Mensheviks, you are traitors to the working class, because you are collaborating with the bourgeoisie. That is useless if these same masses still have illusions in their reformist leaders. Instead, you have to patiently explain, to show what is objectively necessary to solve the problems of the working class by putting demands on the reformist leaders. And that is what the ultra-left sectarians can never understand. They would say, but the reformists will never take power. Why should you call on them to take power? But this misses the point of the point entirely. As Francesco explained, it has to be shown in practice. And the force of the Bolshevik agitation was exactly this. They were able to connect the demands of the moment of the movement, bread, land and peace, to the slogan, all power to the Soviets. That is to show that these demands, these basic demands, can only be realized if the working class takes power. And Lenin knew that the masses will necessarily have to come to exactly that conclusion through their own experience. And if the reformist leaders are not disposed to take power, then the masses will lose the confidence in their own leaders and start looking towards the Bolsheviks. And that is precisely what happened during the year 1917. The reformists were dragging their feet, continued to rely on the bourgeoisie, showed in practice that they were unable to solve any of the problems of the working class and the poor peasants. And by this approach, patiently, the Bolsheviks won the masses over the year of the revolution. And this is only one example, but I would say that it shows the full force of Lenin's Marxist dialectical method. On the one hand, you have the unconditional defense of the socialist program and of the independent class position of the working class against all the pressures of public opinion and in a hard opposition to all the opportunists who subordinated themselves to the bourgeoisie. On the other hand, Lenin avoids falling into the ultra-left sectarian trap of this pseudo-revolutionarism that just shouts revolution in the loudest way possible. Instead, the real art is to put forward the right slogans at the right time, which can build a bridge from the needs of the masses to the socialist program. And that's what we have to learn, comrades.
Well, comrades, my contribution is linked to the very good question that Serena asked in the beginning, and also to the inspiring contribution by Comrade Lucas. And if we read that wonderful book Francesco spoke about, Left-Wing Communism, you see one of the main features of Lenin's political figure, if you like, political character, when he speaks not about 1917, but about the previous 20 years. Because what was typical of Lenin, that he didn't just stop at a general appraisal of a given situation, but at every juncture,
whether it would be a revolutionary situation or a reactionary situation. He always strives to find that lever, that point of support through which the movement can advance and the party can advance. There is no stage theory here. First, we win the vanguard through propaganda, then the objective situation push the masses into action, and then the vanguard can try to connect to the masses. It is not like that. Or rather, there are priorities, there are stages, but every idea, if it is pushed to the extreme, becomes one-sided and ultimately wrong. And in the manifesto we voted upon on Monday, there is an important chapter or paragraph named Build a Bridge to the Masses. How do we do this now? First of all, certainly through education, political education, and by doing something that Ted Grant was fond of repeating, learning to see the world through the eyes of the working class. And this is not a sentimental question. This implies serious and continuous study of the concrete conditions. What is mass work? You can say mass work implies addressing the masses, that is, millions of people or even more, and this is far beyond our abilities now. But there is also another way of looking at this point. Let's give an example. We recruit one worker in a factory or a workplace, and maybe we recruit him or her through a discussion on Palestine or on the war in Ukraine or any other subject, political subject. But then you have a comrade in a workplace, maybe of 100 or maybe 1,000, which is not a mass, but it is like a cross-section of the masses. That is, you find all the different layers, all the different level of consciousness concentrated in one sample, if you like. Another example is what the British comrades are doing. We are not standing candidates everywhere in Britain, but in that college, in that constituency, we will find people who represent all the different political opinions and levels of consciousness that are representative more or less of the mass in general. And doing this sort of work forces us to learn how to address these different layers, how to find the method, the words, the language, the demands, and the actions that are needed to relate to this reality. We discussed, I think it was last Congress or the previous Congress, about the question of inflation in the world. We didn't do that to discuss statistics on economics or just to say things are bad for the workers, which are. But that should help us to identify a living contradiction for the working class. The question of wages, of real wages being ferociously cut by inflation. And this had a clear political effect in a wave of economic struggle in one country after another, particularly in USA, in Great Britain, but also in other countries. And of course, we cannot address this just by saying, capitalism is in a deep crisis or even terminal crisis, so your strikes are useless. Or maybe your strike is good, but you must turn it into an insurrection. We must go into details and concretely address this peculiar layer of the class, which is advancing. Trotsky wrote a wonderful article or text called The Third Period of Mistakes of the Third International, in which he explained very clearly the role and the connections of the economic struggle with political struggle, even in an epoch of capitalist crisis. And so we, in every section, of course, we have priorities. We are recruiting a lot of young people. We are recruiting with our general political profile, with our propaganda, with our agitation on the war and so on. But when the conditions are present, which are not present everywhere, but in many countries they are, definitely, we must also learn how to study this field of battle. In left-wing communism, Lenin said we had to learn how to employ every tactic, every tool of the class struggle. Legal work, illegal work, economic struggle, parliamentary work, anti-parliamentary work, when they boycotted the Duma, which was not always correct, but this is another discussion. Not because we want to be better activists, but because these are the different ways that the movement expresses itself. And if we manage to build some strongholds, some point of reference, if we are able to sink roots at least in some section of the class, this becomes also a political lever, a political tool for the general construction of the organization. I give you a short example. We have some of this in Italy, some areas, some cities where we have a tradition of trade union work quite developed. And in one of these areas, in Modena, when the war in Gaza, where the massacre in Gaza came about, through the shop stewards of our organization and our sympathizers, we were able to call a mass demonstration, forcing a wider layer of mainly metal workers, but not only that, who were linked to the Arab population there. And we were able to call a relatively huge demonstration, maybe 2,000 people in a medium-sized town. That was not a united front with the bureaucracy, because since they had a pacifist position and they were afraid of being called anti-Semite, they said. So one of the leaders of the trade union said, if I see only one flag of our union in that demonstration, we will kick you out. So the communists brought huge banners and a lot of flags everywhere. It was not one, it was more than one. And of course nothing happened. They couldn't attack us. But what I'm telling you is to finish. It is through this sort of work that we will be put to a test. And there are many other aspects I don't have time to go into. Maybe one day we can organize a commission like yesterday's commission, wonderful commission on youth work, on university work, also on this aspect. The question like that Lucas posed, for instance. But through this, we will be tested, our comrades will be tested as members of this organization, of this new banner that we are raising, and we will be able to play the role we want to play. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There's no more time for interventions, unfortunately. So I have to apologize to other comrades who put their name on the list. But I'll now call Francesco to sum up the discussion. Before he does that, just a reminder that Well-Read Books has republished Lenin's Left-Wing Communism and Infantile Disorder with a new introduction. And this is recommended, I wouldn't say required, but very strongly recommended reading for all comrades who want to understand about tactics and strategy. You can get it from the Well-Read Books stall in the main meeting hall or online from the Well-Read Books website.
Let's hope this whole thing doesn't collapse. Okay, well, it's been an excellent discussion and a lot of food for thought for the comrades. I'll start from the point that Claudio raised in his excellent intervention in answering some questions that were raised. So the relevance of this discussion for us today is to educate ourselves in the method of how to win the masses. This is not going to become, an innate talent of the comrades just because they've read Left-Wing Communism. It's something that we need to apply in our day-to-day approach towards the political propaganda and agitation. In the way we intervene in the movements, there are elements of mass work in the trade union work, as Claudio explained, or even on the youth mobilizations. As we saw, for example, in the mobilization in the Palestine Solidarity Movement, it wasn't enough to go in there with the red flags and say we're the communists, we're for the Intifada. That was a propagandistic element in our position, which allowed us to stand out in a way with the revolutionary position. But then we had to fill in with content our intervention with proposals, transitional demands on how to expand the movement, on how to approach the question of divestment and so on and so forth. So we have elements of mass work on a limited scale, let's put it that way. And of course, in a strike, for example, you have to deal with all the different layers, even backward layers of the workforce. And keep into account all of this when you build the strike. So that's important, because otherwise we would be in a position of leading many strikes to defeat. But we must learn, as an organization, of course, in this phase, we can get away with minor mistakes. It's not like the March action, where the Communist Party put the bulk of its forces in a premature insurrection. It was so bad that in some circumstances you had open warfare between the communists and workers in the factories, because the workers didn't understand the call for an insurrection, or they were based for social democracy and trade union bureaucrats, and they succeeded in mobilizing sections of the workers against the premature insurrection. So of course we must learn from these experiences, but also from minor mistakes we may commit in this or that field of work. But we must correct these mistakes should they arise. On the question of was posed by Adam in his intervention, it's the overall trait of left-wing communists, at least in the epoch of Lenin, was dual in a sense. Was dual. There were two elements in there. One was this healthy rejection of the existing leaderships and existing tactics and politics. This impatient mood that I described also in the lead-off. But a lot of the theories of the left-wing communists were based on idealistic philosophical approach, idealista. So, for example, the appraisal of how the revolution should be, not how it is. In fact, if you look at the philosophical background of Gorter or Pannekoek or other theories, they have an idealistic approach. They're not Marxists, and this is a common trait in these ultra-leftist theoreticians, and they all fall into sectarianism at some point, because their common trait is formalistic approach towards anything. Their constant concern is to separate the revolutionary elements from the rest. But by separating them, they're also helping the reactionary forces, the reformists, to keep a hold over a portion of the masses. So, for example, while the trade unions were growing from 1.5 to 7.5 million workers in the space of 1 year, the Communist Workers' Party managed to put together a trade union of 100,000 workers. And in some factories, these trade unions may even had a leading role, and they were militant. But what could have these 100,000 militant workers have achieved if they carried out patient work in the trade unions, as Lenin advised them? So what we apply in our day-to-day activity, to go back to the question, which is, I think, the most important question we have to take with us, let's say, take home with us, is that we need to apply not necessarily the United Front tactic or this or that tactic, but the method behind it in all our activities, in all our interventions. And in order to do that, we need to understand the method behind it, not just the form. And one of the essences, the essence of the United Front tactics is that the revolutionary forces launch an agreement, or propose an agreement, or accept an agreement, say. So they establish some rules of the game, in a way, of the political competition within a certain movement. But within these rules, there is never a concession about the freedom of movement for the communists. We don't accept to limit our ability to criticize, our ability to come forward with proposals. And of course, we propose a number of demands within the movement, and we defend our right to agitate, to defend these ideas. And the essence of the United Front tactics is that there is an agreement to hit together but march in a way separately. But of course there is a difference between a strike in a factory or a limited movement which has some sort of mass echo but on a limited scale, and a full-blown revolutionary movement with the masses involved. And in those circumstances, the United Front tactics becomes vital as a way to unmask the reformists, the reactionary leaders of the working class. Then when we talk about these left-wing communist moods, or left-wing communist moods, let's say, in the masses, well, we have historical examples like the July days, for example, in the Russian Revolution, where a large part of the working class is more advanced than the rest of the class. The problem of the July days is the working class in Petrograd and Moscow, they were ready to take power. they felt confidence they could do it. Yes, they probably would have been capable of doing that, limited to where they were temporarily. Yeah, but would they been able to hold power once? And so there was this ultra-left mood, in a way, which was a mass mood among the working class. And we have to be very clear about this. There is nothing wrong with the offensive, or going on to the offensive. But as a revolutionary party, we have the responsibility to make sure that the offensive is called when the conditions exist to win. And in class warfare, there are moments when, and like in war, you need to organize an orderly retreat in order to preserve your forces. And that's true even in the small-scale front of strikes, for example. You can't always launch or relaunch the offensive, the strike. It has to be based on the concrete circumstances. And sometimes, in order to preserve the forces in a trade union struggle, you have to reach a deal that is not what you were aiming for. The important thing is the way this is presented. We don't claim a defeat for a victory. We always speak, we always tell the truth. It's not a question of prestige. It's a question of educating our forces for the revolutionary prospect. I'm running out of time. I wanted to focus on one last question. It is the approach taken by Lenin in all this turbulent period was that of educating the vanguard, educating the most advanced elements, the revolutionaries. So when you read the postscript to left-wing communism that Lenin wrote in May 1920, which is an integral part of the book, you can read his reaction to the news that the Communist Workers' Party was formed and split from the Communist Party. And he welcomed the news of the split in a way, although it was a disastrous split for the Communist Party. But because it brought about clarity. But then if you read the following part of Lenin's appraisal of the situation, he's saying, well, now they have to prove that their perspectives, their methods, their ability to lead the working class to power is correct. And he was convinced that through experience, the Communist International would be able to recover a large part of the people that were kind of misled onto that path. So he insisted, for example, in the fact that the split itself, was probably a necessary step, but that the Communist Party leadership should make every effort in order to not create any additional barrier for the future reunification of the revolutionary forces on a higher level. In fact, this tactic worked out in many different ways. The Communist Workers' Party had played an important role in the events around 1920, 1921, but then imploded and became less relevant force. And a large part of the workers that were following these left communist ideas were then reintegrated in the Communist Party. So I think what we need to take home is that as a Revolutionary Communist International, every one of our comrades must study, must assimilate the method of Marxism. The essence of Lenin's left-wing communism and all his works is well brought out in Lenin's biography written by Rob Sewell and Alan Woods that we published recently, which is a political biography of Lenin and shows how Lenin's method worked throughout in very different circumstances. It was always the same method. So from our point of view, whatever we do, whatever successes we achieve in our activities, they would be completely irrelevant if they were not based on a full understanding of the Marxist method. We need to build our organization on the solid rock of Marxist theory. And the only way to do it is to use our knowledge, whatever we have, and intervene in the movement and learn from this experience and study more and build our forces and intervene again. So as Claudio pointed out, there are no stages from this point of view. There are just logical stages to help, understanding something. It's not that now we raise the communist flag and the vanguard will flock to us And tomorrow when the masses move, well, we will have a party of tens of thousands and we will be able to intervene in that. I'm sure no comrade thinks in this way. But if you do, think twice, study more, discuss with your comrades. And I'm sure we will move forward to achieve our targets in the future. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. This is the end of this session. This afternoon is the free afternoon, but for those of you following from home, and let's remember there's been over 7,000 people registered to the School of Communism from 120 different countries. A reminder that all sessions of the school are available online, not only to watch as they are happening, but also afterwards. You can find them on the schoolofcommunism.com website and on the Marxist.com YouTube channel. So thank you very much. The sessions will continue tomorrow morning.